Welcome everyone. Today we will learn how to create and execute PayPal payments with .NET and Angular. So as a prerequisite, we need to have a PayPal account. Go to the developer dashboard, click App and Credentials. So to perform calls to the PayPal API, we need to create an application. By default, PayPal creates a new application, so we can use the client ID and the client secret to perform HTTP requests. So we'll copy those values, go to Visual Studio and create an AS.NET Core Entity application. Define the name, select the location, click Next, and select the version of the project. The first step is to install the PayPal NuGet package. So I'll open the package manager console, get the console and type install package PayPal. We need two more packages to perform requests to the PayPal API. The first one will be system.configuration manager. And finally, install system.security.permissions. That's it. The second step is to add the credentials in the add settings.json file. Create a PayPal section, add in the client ID, go back to the developer dashboard, copy the value. The second one will be the client secret, copy the key, and finally define the mode, which in this case will be sandbox for testing purposes. The third step is to create a PayPal service to create the payment and to execute the payment. So let's create a method which will return a payment object at the reference to the PayPal API. This method will create the payment. Add a new instance of this object. We need to pass several parameters. The first one is the intent, which will be sale to perform the transaction directly. The next one will be the payment of the payer. Create a new object and then define the payment method, which will be PayPal to process the transaction using the PayPal checkout. The next one will be the transactions list, which contains all the information about the items and about the prices. So let's create a new variable in this method called transactions, which will be a new list of type transaction. Create a single transaction and define multiple parameters. The first one will be the description of the transaction. The next one will be the item list. So we'll receive the item list as a collection from the CreatePayment method as an argument. So let's create an item DTO. Add this class in the project and define three properties. The first one will be the name. The second one will be the price. And finally, we have the quantity. Go back. Basically, the item list is an object of type item list, which we will pass the items required to pass to the PayPal checkout. So this is a list. So let's transform the items DTO using the select method from link. And in order to define several parameters in this transaction, we'll set the item list, but we need to also define the amount object, which contains the information about the shipping cost, taxes, and total, and the subtotal. So this amount contains the currency, which by default we'll use dollars. And this parameter contains the details about the amount, the shipping cost. By default, we will create a shipping decimal value as 0. And similarly for the taxes, this is just for demo purposes. All decimal values we need to transform to a string to pass to the PayPal request, and the tax as well. And the subtotal will be the sum of the price multiplied by the quantity of the items. So in this items.select function, first of all, we will create a subtotal at the top, set to 0, and then sum the price multiplied by the quantity. And then we will transform this item DTO to the item required for PayPal. Let's return a new item from the PayPal API, defining the name. We have the currency, which will be the same as the currency defined in the amount object, the price, transform as a string, and similarly for the quantity. And transform this enumerable to string, to list, sorry. And the subtotal will be the variable value as a string, and this amount object contains the total property, which is the sum of the shipping cost plus taxes plus subtotal, and transform to string. Okay, so pass this transactions object to the payment, and the final parameter we will set is the redirect URLs. We'll set two variables, the cancel URL that it's executed or is called when the payer cancels the payment. So for this demo, we won't use this URL. So let's define as empty. Let's define as a related path, and we need the return URL. That basically is when the payer approves this payment, we will execute the payment, so we get the money. So we will execute, or we will call a new endpoint from this API. So for that, we will pass a base URL for this CreatePayment method. That basically is the URL from our API. Here, using interpolation, we pass the base URL and then the action name, which will be ExecutePayment. And then we will return the payment object by calling the create method. And we need to pass an API context. This API context is needed to authenticate using an access token. So add a new method of this type, API context, called getContext. Basically, we will create a new object, and as a constructor, we will pass the access token, which is a string. So define a new method called getAccessToken. This getAccessToken will create a new object of type OAuth token credential from the PayPal API, and we'll pass the credentials from the app settings.json. So we need to create a dictionary of key value paths. So add a new dictionary key value paths to get the configuration from the app settings.json. Create a new dictionary and define the values. So to define the values, we need to access the app settings.json. So scroll up, and by a constructor, we will inject the iConfiguration interface to access the app settings.json values. Scroll down and define the key value paths. The first one will be the mode, which basically comes from configuration and the key, which is go to the app settings.json PayPal mode, add two more key value paths. The next one will be the client ID. This should be declared as lowercase. The next one will be the client secret, and we'll pass this configuration to the auth token credential and then call the getAccessToken method. So here we pass the access token to the API context, but we need to pass the configuration, the dictionary, which contains the mode, client ID, and client secret. So in the payment object, in the create method, we will call the getContext, passing the required authorization. So in this CreatePayment method, we display the information about the transaction in the PayPal checkout view, the information about the items, about the subtotal, the shipping and tax cost, and then when the payer approves the payment, we will redirect to a new endpoint. So let's create a method called ExecutePayment that will be called in the API endpoint that returns this URL. So this method will return a payment object, but in this case, we will execute the payment. We will get the money, okay? So this ExecutePayment expects two parameters. The first one is the pay ID and the payment ID associated. So create a new DTO at this class in the project, and we will receive the pay ID and the payment ID. So we'll create a new execute or payment execution property. This payment execution will set the pay ID from the DTO and create the payment object, which basically we will set this payment object to the ID, to the payment created in the first method. Okay, so pass the payment ID, and we just simply call payment that execute the payment to get the money, passing the API context, the credentials, get context, and the payment execution, which contains the information about the pay ID, and that's it. We create the payment, we display the information about the payment to the user in this method, and then we'll set the return URL to execute the payment. So in the execute payment method, we'll get the money, okay? So go to the program.cs file and define the API endpoints. The first one will be to create the payment. For demo purposes, we'll return or we'll create a new PayPal service class. You can apply dependency injection, but for this demo, we'll just create a new instance and pass the configuration. So in this endpoint, we will receive from body the items, okay, a collection of item DTO, and we'll inject the configuration interface, and finally we'll inject the HTTP context to access the base URL from this API. So the base URL will be context that request that host that value. So create a new PayPal service, passing the configuration, and then call the CreatePayment method, passing the items and the base URL. And the second endpoint will be to execute the payment, receiving from body the execute payment DTO. Remove the HTTP context, is no longer needed in this endpoint. We'll execute the payment, passing the DTO. That's it. The final step for this minimal API is to add CORS to allow requests from external sources. So here we'll register the CORS and add to the pipeline calling app that use CORS. And using an anonymous function, we will allow any origin, allow any header, and allow any method. That's it from the API. Now it's time to create the Angular application to display the PayPal buttons. So go to VS Code and run in a terminal in GM using the Angular CLI to create an Angular application. Define the name, skip the test, inline styles, and select the defaults for simplicity. Open the containing folder, open a terminal, go to the browser, and we have this NGET's PayPal library to integrate PayPal in an Angular application. So scroll down and install this library, execute in the terminal. So far so good. Go back and import the NGET's PayPal module in the TypeScript file, add it in the import section, and then add this line of code in the HTML to display, to render the PayPal buttons. Replace the sample code and create this PayPal config property in the add component TypeScript file. So go back, we have some sample code. This is for creating orders on client. We'll create the orders on the server side, so scroll down. This is for creating orders on the server side, but we'll also authorize on the server side. So let's copy this sample code. Okay, so this PayPal config object contains the client ID. So go back to the PayPal developer tab, copy the client ID. This CreateOrderOnServer function will perform a request to our API endpoint to create the payment. Okay, so we will replace this URL with the URL defined in the minimal API. So let me copy the API URL and then define the name of the action, CreatePayment. Define several options in this code. The first one is the method, which is post. Define a header for the content type as JSON, and finally pass the items from the body. So we'll use JSON.stringify to transform a NuGet to a JSON string. So add a new array of items. So create an anonymous object with the same properties, with the name of the item, then the price, and finally the quantity. We'll hardcode the values for the purposes. Add a second item, define this parameter as any, and then from the order response, we'll pass the order, that token. For security reasons, we're using the token instead of the order ID. Okay, so now with this code, we create the payment, we display the information about the transaction in the PayPal checkout, and then we will authorize on the server side, we will execute the payment. So this approved data, let's set it as any, and we will use the same API URL, but in a different action that will be ExecutePayment. So let's copy the method and the headers, and the body will contain two properties. As you remember, we need the pay ID and the payment ID, and that's it. Remove the errors, remove the variables we haven't declared, and the method. Okay, so import this a PayPal config. This AuthorizeOnServer need to return the response, and that's it. Save it, clear the console, and save the Angular application. Navigate to the Angular application. We have the PayPal buttons. So let's create a payment using a PayPal account. So when we click the PayPal button, it will invoke the CreatePayment method from the .NET endpoint for the .NET application. Okay, it will display all the information about the transaction. So before executing the payment, go back to the PayPal account, go to the sandbox accounts, and we have two sandbox accounts. We can use the personal account to be the payer, to pay to the business account. So go to the business account to reset the balance, scroll down, and the PayPal balance, let's save it as 0. Let's reset the balance and go back and use the personal account, the email and the password to process the payment. So copy the email, go back to the PayPal checkout window, let's switch the language, copy the email and the password, log in, and click in the subtotal. We have the detailed information about the items, about the prices, and the subtotal. So we'll complete the purchase. When we click this button, we will execute the payment. We will call the second API endpoint from the .NET application. So click complete. So far, so good. So how to verify? Go back and click in the business account, scroll down, and you can see the PayPal balance is updated. It's not the same value due to the PayPal fees. It's not the same balance. And you can see the details about the API calls. In this event loads section, click API calls, scroll down, and we have the detailed information about the request. You can click this one to see the request and responses. This is the request, and we have the response with all detailed information about the transaction. Okay, this is the transaction with the total. You can see, if you scroll down, prices, the items, and you can see the transaction fee for this payment. So in this demo, we've learned how to create and execute a PayPal payment with .NET and Angular.